Hello, I'm Brian, and today I will be refuting the claim that guilty by insanity verdicts is not a fair verdict for anyone involved. Her secondary claims included the verdict of guilty by insanity does not allow for any fair treatment. 2, the outcomes of the guilty but mentally ill verdict are horrible. And 3, the state of the mind of the individual once incarcerated is not good. So before I jump into each claim individually, I wanted to stress the fact on a few points here. Starting with the main claim, the claim is appealing more to an emotional debate, and it's a claim of value, not necessarily a claim of fact. And as for the secondary claims, I read these 3, but it looks like 2 of them could just fit into the category of another. So it only seems like she really has one subclaim right here. So with that, I'm going to jump into claim 1, which is the verdict of guilty by insanity does not allow for fair treatment. She starts off her speech with an example of a woman named Susanna Simpson, who she described as someone who was mentally ill, that she went and killed her husband at night, and then the next morning drove her 2 kids with her and crashed into a tree and killed both the kids that way. And there was no citation for that particular story or that court case. So I looked it up on multiple different resources, and they're all saying that she didn't kill the kids by actually driving them into a tree. She shot both her kids and attempted to kill her husband. And now the husband has permanent memory loss, and he can't even remember his kids. So that's not exactly the same story she was telling us. Another thing that she mentioned to us was that she told us that Suzanne pleaded guilty, which was a complete false. The reality is that she pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity. I don't know why you would plead guilty for something like that. So with that, her outline points are not necessarily secondary claim points. I actually had to take the secondary claims of what she said in the speech, so I'm just going to jump into the outline here. So when she talks about the insanity defense, she makes a point here that says that it is only invoked less than 1% at a time in criminal cases, and out of that 1%, only 25% of those cases do the defendant get acquitted, which I don't think helps her position at all, because it just makes it seem like it's not a big deal. And so the next point in that insanity defense argument is that if they do get acquitted and they're found not guilty, but by reason of insanity, that they're sent to mental institutions. And then she also cited down in another place that in Jones versus the U.S., it's found unconstitutional for sentencing people to mental health facilities for not being guilty. They're not allowed to be there longer than whatever their jail time would have been if they had been found guilty. And so the problem I have with that is it doesn't necessarily support the claim, because there's another counterclaim, which is essentially that the longer you spend in a mental hospital over the course of many decades, are you really improving or getting better? And I did a little bit of research into that, and I could see there were some things. I didn't get into it a lot, unfortunately, but there was evidence there to suggest that once you spend decades inside of a mental facility, you're not going to realize what you're going to do when you get out. So with that, I'm going to move on. So she talks about the guilty but mentally ill laws, and she describes that these laws are no different from someone being told that they're guilty. And she explains that they're given the same sentence without chance of rehabilitation, usually sent to prison, and have the option of death and no access to mental health treatment. And in my articles on Suzanne Simpson, it seemed that while she was in prison, now she is also being treated for bipolar disorder at the same time. So that's an opposite of what she was describing, and that's actually counter to what her whole argument is. Let's see. In the argument, she talked about the difference between pleading and to actually be accused or to be sentenced. And in reality, it was never defined that difference between pleading and getting a verdict and what that really means for that person. And so I don't see why that was needed to bring up if we're only talking about the verdict itself. So that was unnecessary information in that argument. And lastly, she also uses this Suzanne Simpson character and she describes her to be like in a box of, where she can't be helped, she can't be assisted in any way, and that is an appeal to emotion, which is definitely not what should be in a claim of fact argument, and that the language of insanity and mental illness in these verdicts are also not defined properly. So with that, the claim was that guilty by insanity is not a fair verdict for anyone involved, and I gave you my reasons for why that claim could be false. Thank you.
Right, Bryan, I can see that you're trying to come to grips with the kind of abstract argument that's being presented here. I'm still a little befuddled as to what the exact inference is. What am I supposed to see as working or not working, as appropriate or inappropriate? I got a lot of description of what the procedures were, and I'm not always sure why that procedure is problematic. There seems to be a presupposition that if you do anything other than the criminal justice system, that's a problem, and if you do the criminal justice system, that's a problem. So we've got this kind of catch-22 on this issue. I like the way that you kind of generally suggest let's talk about some of the particular evidence, let's talk about some context, and maybe we can make an inference here or there. You go through some of the information on the Susan Simpson case, for instance, and although the advocate got some data incorrect on the story, which I think there's nothing wrong with your pointing that out, I'm not exactly sure that that gets you much more. I mean, what does that accomplish for you? The better information that you had that came later was that, in fact, she did receive treatment for bipolar disease, and the idea that she's sitting in a box someplace not being treated appears not to be accurate. So, in essence, if the advocate's position is that submitting somebody for this plea deal or this particular sentence results in their not getting treated, and the only case that they've got that she can illustrate that with is this Susan Simpson case, and that's not what happened, then I don't know that you can make a generalization that a lack of treatment is going to result from these insanity pleas or sentences. That's, I think, the way you want to summarize that argument. That's about the most sense I can make of what was being talked about here, because otherwise it's just, there's some general thing about the insanity plea that's a little bit problematic. I like the point that you made that says, look, it's used in less than 1% of criminal cases, and only in 25% of those cases is it successful, and your answer is, which shows that it's not really a big problem. Why are we spending time talking about this? The only folks that are affected by this are people who are criminally insane, and we either put them in prison or we send them to an institution. I'm good with either of those, Why is it that we're worrying about this difference? What does the difference make? Why is that important? Did the advocate give us a reason why it's important? And that's where you need to say, no, we've created this double bind situation where sending them to prison's a bad idea, sending them to an institution's a bad idea. Well, you know what? Killing people's a bad idea too. But we got to do something with these folks. So why are either of these solutions problematic? That's the thing that I think is the essence of this argument. And you kind of get to it, but it's still a little esoteric. We've gone longer on this. I remember talking about it too long when it came up the first time. All right.